that.
That's great.
You ready?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Holly, thank you so much for doing this. It is a treat and a treasure.
God, I love having a catchphrase.
You know, I was actually calculating, and I'm like, a lot of my favorites you have been in and a part of. The Reckoning
What?
at IO.
Okay.
Loved it.
Uh-huh.
Was obsessed with it. And South Side of Heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah, South Side of Heaven was real good at the Second City. And then, of course, Mega is hilarious.
Oh, man. You're making me feel
Everything you
good.
touch is gold.
Wow. Tell that to me when I'm spinning out in the middle of the night, can't sleep. I will keep that in my pocket for a rainy day. Thank you so much. And I am also a fan of you. And I think this podcast you're doing is incredible. And the fact that you're doing it from a camper while traveling across the country, which is a dream of mine, is pretty cool.
We wouldn't have been doing it except for COVID. Like, just like having that like pause in your life and that like extra time, and like I have to change something. Like I had 2 months to work on this camper. It was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, thanks, COVID, for opening a door or a window.
I know. Are we allowed to say, like, good things can come from bad things?
That's right.
And, yeah. I get it. And now you got a camper.
Right? Yeah. So, the thing about Mega is it's so funny. And it's because like your shit so much. Yeah. That makes it so funny. There's this thing that happens when you like I think maybe you've experienced it too, where you talk to people about like your religious upbringing. You're like, oh, did you grow up Christian? And they're like, oh yeah. And then you ask some people, you're like, hey, did you grow up Christian? And there's like that 1,000-mile stare of like, yes, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I do.
Yeah, there's a difference between like Greg grew up going to a pretty like, chill Presbyterian church in a small town in Virginia, and like doesn't consider himself traumatized. And and there are other people where it's like, I got out. You know what my weird thought this week was, Jonny, is I was like, you know how you hear stuff from time to time about like, oh, is this a simulation? Like, are we in a simulation?
Right. Of course.
The very fact that we can like program things means we could be a program, blah, blah, blah. And it really, to me, it changes nothing about the way I experience reality. If this is a program, or if this is a, it doesn't change anything really. Sometimes though, it actually comforts me. But if you combine it with the idea of, the journey of the soul through many lives, as it is learning whatever it's learning, which I also don't know if I believe at all, because I am in such reaction to having deconstructed a belief system that now I find it very difficult to just not be like cynical, or maybe even I just have hurt feelings. Like it's hard for me to trust anything. It's like, okay, so the Buddhists are saying reincarnation, and damn it.
Anything with specifics, right? It's a little hard to be like, I left something very specific and I'd moved to something even more specific.
Yeah. And the one I was born into, it had its clutches and claws in me pretty deep, and it's been quite a long, arduous process. But everybody's got their thing, and you end up with your chosen family, like through those trials and tribulations, and there are blessings that come from, curses. But if you combine the idea of the simulation with, and I don't know if this makes any sense, but if you combine it with reincarnation, I've had this thought recently of like, what if my soul was sort of like standing on that cliff, like ready to jump into another life or whatever, like learning what my soul has learned. I wonder if sometimes I think lately, like, what if my soul was like, all right, I'm going to jump into I'm going to select amnesia, of course, which you have to. And then I'm going to go into a mind control cult and see if I can get out. And when I think about it like that, it like makes me feel really good, where I'm like, ooh, maybe I did it. Maybe I did the thing that I came here to do, with all according to all these ideas I'm not even sure I even believe, but it could all be bullshit, but at least it makes me feel good of like I found my way out of a
It wakes you up enough to get you out.
Yeah.
Did you there's a HBO, I want to say it's HBO documentary on, I forget what it's called, but it's all the people who Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames did, drank the Kool-Aid, went up with like Hell Bop.
Oh yeah.
Am I mixing the stories? That's Heaven's Gates. Is it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right. I think so.
so.
What was his name? I'm mixing up like David Koresh and like
There was
the
two
one?
of them. There's a man and a woman, and
But where they drank the Kool-Aid,
they drank
put on
the Kool-Aid,
good sneakers,
and
and
they
like caught a ride with a comet.
they thought they were gonna go behind Hale Bop.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching that documentary, and like honestly, the thing that struck me from it was like they're having so much fun. Like Holly, they were so happy and so fulfilled.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
there's something to say to that, like getting to be certain about something, like how good that feels, of just like also just like I was thinking today too before we got on this call about like how in a weird way, you know, as improvisers, I was thinking about how like, you know, having religion in your life like is like a focus and a want, and it moves you forward. But also there's like these built-in, like, you know, when you do a scene, there should be some sort of like, can't just get what you want whenever. There's got to be some urgency built in. And it's like the idea of not only dying, but the rapture happening at any moment. Constant urgency built in.
Yeah.
Which is like, just helps you like, I mean, feel like you've got so much focus and energy behind like, and guidance behind what you're doing, which is just such a nice feeling to have. And it's hard to like question that stuff and then let that go.
Well, yeah, because that certainty is so cozy that like you can even go from deconstructing like a fundamentalist, like evangelical belief system and just go like atheist, which is also certainty.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Like, atheism was, that was such a like relaxing romp while it lasted. And then unfortunately, I just kept listening to teachers of all sorts and doing psychedelics. And then I was like, oh, wait, I don't think atheism is it either. Damn it. Maybe the thing is that nothing is certain. I was reading this and our perspective is so limited. And we know like what? 6% of the known universe is even like knowable to us, and we are limited by these.
We know 6%. That seems high.
We're doing pretty good.
That seems pretty good.
But like we, you know, I always think about this, that like we think that colors are, you know, the color wheel of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and that's it. It's all there in those 6 colors or whatever. And butterflies are like, wow, you are very sad in your limitations, because butterflies see thousands and thousands of colors. And we're like, no,
unfair.
No, those aren't there. I don't see any of that. I don't think that's there. And I was reading this week, what was her name? She was talking about how like if you look at a tree and you say trees are green, the reason that we see trees as green or grass as green is because it's the one part of the color spectrum that it is casting off and not absorbing. It's saying, I am all of these other colors except green. Green is the one thing I am not. It is what I am casting off. And we're like, okay, it's green.
Yeah, it's green.
And it just, stuff like that makes me be like, oh, wow, we know very, very, very little. And we, I think, do ourselves a great disservice. And we keep ourselves in a good amount of pain and suffering by believing that most of this is real, and believing that our feelings are real, and believing, you know, that the way we keep ourselves in pain is to continue to tell ourselves the stories of our pain. And it's sorry, I'm just spewing at this point.
I'm not going to be able to back this up or quote who this was, but I'm just going to say it because it tickled my brain and it was fun when I heard it on a podcast the other day. We are like, apparently it's pretty certain that any organism that survives is not optimized to observe reality. In fact, that when like when they run algorithms and whoever studies this stuff, they're like, oh, the more a organism perceives reality, the more they die off. And so like you have to actually be more like simplified and specialized in like a very like minute way you grasp time and like space. Like so like biologically, like like we might not even ever be able to understand what we don't understand because we're not even optimized. We're optimized not to pay attention to things and know things, which is bonkers. Sounds fun, right? I can't quote that. I don't know who that came from, but
that really rings my bell. I get that. Like I feel that on a cellular level. Like, oh yeah. I mean, maybe this brainstem is just like we gotta stay as close to fight, feed, and fuck as we possibly can. And that's it. Of like, does this get me food? Does this help me spread my seed? Does this like, keep us going? And yeah, that's really interesting. And then that brings up a lot of stuff with like, for me, then like this late stage capitalistic. So like, not only are we limited ourselves just for our own survival, but then we've created these like bureaucracies and systems to regulate and force like conformity or fear or whatever to be productive, to be consumers. And so then and we put like moral value on all these things because it's but man, I think it's creating a lot of pain.
Yeah, man, it is. It's like this year, like every year for like a decade, I've been like, I need to start meditating for like a decade. And this year I started doing it a little bit. And it's just like, I'm like, oh yeah, of course I needed to be doing this. But it also, it's like in those moments where you just like take a little like time, and I do all guided meditation through Sam Harris's app, Waking Up.
Cool.
You you just start to kind of get acquainted with like, oh man, how busy my brain is and how bought it is into every narrative. Like even if you're not like breaking out of it, just the fact that you're aware, like just spending a little time looking at it and being like, oh, I can't stop. Like half of meditation for me is just remembering I'm meditating. Like in the first second, I'm like, forgot I meditated. I'm meditating already.
Yeah. My meditation practice is TM, Transcendental Meditation, which you do some like training for like 4 days or something. And you get your mantra given to you and whatever. And I'm always like, when I'm having stress dreams, when I'm having nightmares, all that stuff, or even during the day, just being like, wow, this sucks. I'm always like, oh wait, I haven't been meditating. And even as I'm listening to you say that, I'm like, oh, I've never been to a doctor. I've had doctors tell me so many times, like, well, these are kind of just stress related things. Like your scalp becomes completely inflamed because you're stressed, and here's a steroid, or, you have this ulcer in your stomach, or you have IBS because of stress. And and I've never had a doctor talk to me about meditation. Like, the actual things like for that help. We're in a system where it's like it actually doesn't benefit the system for us to be well. It benefits the system for us to be unwell and to be sick and to need drugs and for the companies and the insurance and the drugs and all that stuff. And I mean, we have empowered these bureaucracies to actually lock us up and incarcerate us if we even eat plants or drink from roots that enhance our consciousness.
I know.
So afraid of consciousness that we empower a bureaucracy to be like, okay, if we fuck with these plants, lock us up.
Oh yeah, that is on the nose what's going on.
Yeah. And it's not that like a capitalist culture is against like mind altering drugs. They give us that stuff all the time. They give us Ritalin and Xanax and all the stuff that keeps us to be productive mice,
I heard the other day that there's like a little bit of a theory that when we the Industrial Revolution and a lot of like progress came about when coffee became more readily available. And before that, people were mostly drinking beer all day for like purified water. Like farmers would drink beer most of the day.
Yeah.
And now we're like, our brains are like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Man, why didn't I jump into that era when my little blue soul was like jumping into a new life? Why didn't I
Maybe you're already
era?
there. You learned your lesson.
Like,
You've moved on.
I just did a Russian life where like all I did was drink vodka from morning till night. Or I hear about this like at like business meetings in Japan too, that like people get like blackout or
What?
like it's part of lunch. I could be so wrong about this. But like,
Just say it like you know it.
Like business lunches in Japan where you just get like you drink heavily at lunch and go back to work, and then you get it done in the evening and keep drinking heavily. And yeah, you're
That's
right. Maybe
wild.
I already did that.
So it's funny because I feel like, whatever it was probably that drove anybody specifically deep into religion at one point, there's probably some driving force that still remains. And like, you can already tell, like, by like the way you're talking, Holly, like you're like so passionate about like, whether it's like, fuck capitalism or like whatever's holding us back. And I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit of your upbringing, because as I listened to like Mega, I'm like, oh yeah, Holly, like I was in deep. I grew up in a mega church. All my family was like, pastors and evangelists or whatever. Assemblies of God is where what I grew up in.
Ooh.
Yeah. And we even like, even when I was a kid, it was like, like Brownsville Revival. Like we like our church was doing that sort of thing, like Friday night revival services. And then like the year after high school, I went to a program called Master's Commission, which is out of another mega church. They were all through like the Assemblies of God. It was just like an intense year of like discipleship training, and whatnot. And so I was in very deep. So like, my husband and I were listening to your podcast today while driving. I'm like cracking up, and he grew up Catholic, and he's like, you know what I mean? To some degree, it's like one of those people who are like,
he's not getting the subtle nuance of the evangelical language.
But he doesn't even get like the big strokes too. Like if you're like David and Goliath, he's like, who's that?
Oh wow.
Yeah, like Old Testament. What's that again?
So was your Assembly of God? Did you have the speaking in tongues and slaying the spirit?
Yeah,
and all
absolutely.
That stuff?
Yep.
Did you speak in tongues?
I thought I did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, as a kid.
So when you started improv and they had the gibberish exercise, you were pretty much ahead of the game.
Got it. But someone has to interpret. That's the rule. If one is speaking, someone has to interpret. If they don't interpret, then you have to be silent.
I'm so it's that's a lot. I went to a First Assembly school for a little while.
Did you?
In elementary school, and my glimpse into some of that more like charismatic stuff scared the shit out of me. It really scared me as a kid.
I can't imagine. It's so weird. Like, it's so funny because even stepping back from it, and it, like, I mean, not even going to an evangelical church for like, I don't know, 16, 15 years. Like, stepping back from it, I still like, I kind of get how people are like, what? But I was like, I grew up so much in it that I'm like, yeah, this feels normal actually to me, that people acted like this, or like we did these things.
Yeah.
I say it's almost as akin to like maybe someone who grew up Amish, just like living a completely different life. And it's just like, that was normal for me. I mean, it's so culturally different, like how I grew up.
Yeah. And like you were in so deep, and like at what age did you start to be like, oh, I'm gay?
Oh, when I realized I was probably gay at like 12. Yeah. So like that meant, from like 12 to like 21 or something, there was like gay and felt guilty about it.
Right.
Yeah. And then it took like, just another casual 8 or 9 years to peel that off.
That's pretty good. I mean, whatever it takes. Baby.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
I'd be curious to hear a little bit. So you grew up, your parents were pastors, is that right?
My parents were in one of the first ever Christian rock bands of the late 1970s,
what
early
is it?
80s, called the Good News Circle. You can look them up on YouTube and watch them like sing a 30,000 seat stadium, like Texas A&M like stadium, so opening up for Billy Graham at like a at a crusade, which for some reason they thought that was a fine word to use
Great word.
for getting the Christian gospel out there to the masses, the crusades. Yeah, my parents started out in Christian rock and roll, and then my dad started, once the crowds would sort of be whipped up into a frothy Jesus frenzy, he would, give a message about, Jesus loving you like you've never been loved before, and offering you like all the things that you have ever felt empty about will, feel complete, and altar calls and crying conversions. And I was sort of side stage as a really little kid, kind of watching all this in front of the curtain and behind the curtain. And most of the stuff they played was like, high school assemblies, and like they would go around to like different churches, church revivals, tent revivals, county fairs, stuff like that. But and they had like a bit of a following, and then my dad got more and more into speaking. And then when the band broke up, he just became a full-time like itinerant evangelist, like traveling around the country as an evangelist. And now he's a pastor of a mega church.
Is he really? Wow. And what denomination is that, if you don't mind?
What?
And what denomination is that, if you don't mind?
He is a megachurch pastor of it's funny because I thought it was just like, I used to work at Willow Creek, which was just like non-denominational evangelical,
and that's huge, right? That's another huge church in Chicago.
Huge church outside Chicago. But my dad's, I thought they were just non-denominational evangelical. He told me recently that they're United Methodists, like at their core, and I was like, whoa. United Methodist, I have an impression, is like a little bit more like progressive, at least, than a lot of these evangelical places. And he's like, yeah, our church isn't really following the stuff. We've sort of gone rogue.
Yeah.
to just sort of follow the the Justin Bieber cool church stuff. But so I grew up like, I was in Christian school. Both my mom is a preacher's kid. Both my grandpas were preachers. My dad was a preacher. I was in Christian school, church. When I wasn't on the road with my dad watching like true revivals, like you, I think, witnessed to on the weekends. It was Christian school and my grandpa's church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Bible class 5 days a week, chapel 3 days a week. Like it was everything. It was completely everything. And like for me, it fostered a type of fear in me that was really, really, I found it to be excruciating. And like, and I've had sleep issues and tummy issues my whole life, like from that, of just like really absorbing the fear side of it, like a fear of God, a fear of hell, a fear of demons, a fear of Satan, a fear of it being too late and being left behind and all that stuff. And I now, on the other side of it, I see, I try to understand like what people are still getting from it, and that it does do good for some people. And it's hard for me to compute though, because it was so hard on me. And then it took me like, and my reaction was just to be like, eventually just very, very rebellious. And like, it had all been distilled down for me into don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex, period. That's all you got to do. Classic. And so, as soon as I could, I was like, okay, how do you smoke a cigarette? How do you chug a full bottle of Southern Comfort? How do you have sex with someone? Like, okay. And just to be like, rebel. And the whole time just in agony, because I was like, oh, this means I'm going to hell. And eternal torment is going to suck. Like, I remember wishing, like, why doesn't God just annihilate us? Like,
I know.
Annihilation would be compassionate.
Wouldn't that be like... that story doesn't even
eternity.
Yeah, that doesn't even compute that like God wouldn't let you die. He's like, no, I'm going to keep you around forever. It will never end.
And burning and
he's the most benevolent, loving God. It's like that doesn't compute. Like, if you're going to cherry pick the Bible, cherry pick that stuff out of it. You know what I mean? Like so many people cherry pick the Bible, like just be like, get rid of that part, right? Like.
Right. My sister told me that I can't stop thinking about this. My sister told me the other day, she's raising her kids without religion. And she said she took her kids down with their scooters to the parking lot of this Baptist church in her neighborhood so they could like play on their scooters in the empty parking lot. And her daughter was like, Mom, 4-year-old little girl, Mom, come here. I want to show you something. And my sister went over to her 4-year-old daughter and she was like, what is it? and Fawn was pointing at the door. It was like the side parking lot door of the. It was like a kind of like a metal door that said entrance, where you would enter the church from the parking lot. And she was pointing at the door, and she said, "Mom, that's a nightmare door. If you go in that door, you'll be in a nightmare." And I was like, and my sister said she just was like, "Okay, let's come over here, you know." But I'm like, whoa, out of the mouths of babes. I was like, first of all, your daughter is a witch. or a powerful psychic, or whatever you want to call it, or very intuitive or something. But like, that's a nightmare door. If you go in there, you will be in a nightmare. I'm like, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, that's what it felt like to me, just in terms of like, I didn't get as much comfort from the "he walks me beside cool waters and restores my soul, and he is a good shepherd," and, you know, redemption and all that stuff. I really didn't absorb that to the degree that I did the like really truly like, he will separate the sheep from the goats, and, you know, like, whoa, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a text that was written by Bronze Age tribes that had like blood sacrifice for atonement and stuff. And here we're sitting in a much different time, being like, yeah, blood has to be shed for forgiveness. It's like, what are we talking about? Like, that seems like you went through a nightmare door.
Yeah.
What about just being like, acknowledging and repenting and confessing to someone and pleading and saying, "I am so sorry I wronged you," and them saying, "Thank you for acknowledging it. Yes, it hurt me, and yes, it's okay. We'll move on from this." Can you imagine if a human said to you, like, "Thank you for apologizing. I was going to not just kill you, but I was going to torture you for the rest of your life, like, for you having sinned against me." You'd be like, "Oh, you're a dickhead."
Just a little bit.
I don't think you're cool at all. Especially, I'm not going to worship you. Wait, you want me to worship you?
Yeah. You know, we were driving past a church yesterday that had a pretty much full size Mary holding Jesus dead. And I was like, you know, speaking of, like, you know, earlier about like being just acclimated to so much in our society, like, that's one thing that's like, talking about going into like a nightmare door. Like, when you walk into a church, especially like, you know, maybe more Catholic churches, there's like a person being tortured on a cross hanging above the pulpit. Like, that's gotten like I don't know, we've gotten used to that. Like, if we walked into like, if like the story of Buddha was that he was hung, and like you walked into like a Buddhist monastery and he was hanging from the rafters, you'd be like, this is a nightmare door going in here. Like, what is this? Like, why is there this like tortured person like on display for
normalized.
us?
It's art, it's jewelry. But that was like Roman capital punishment. Like, when the state like kills you for a crime against the state, like, that was capital punishment. Like, can you imagine us having like guillotine, like an image of a guillotine and a rolling head, or a huge like syringe for the way we capitally punish people now? Like, what? I when Greg and I were in we were going through Florence like during our honeymoon, and we went up in Duomo, which is this like big incredible cathedral dome in Florence, like, and you can go up and around like through these tiny staircases, like way up into the painting inside the dome. And as we were up in there, you could look down and see people sitting in a Catholic service below us, like it was happening. And there were children sitting in the chairs and in the church, in the Catholic church service. And I'm looking at the paintings in the dome that the kids are looking up at, and it's truly like a red Satan with a fiery poker, like raping someone in the ass, like with a fire poker, and like murder and blood and like all this, like, all over this dome. And there are like kids sitting there.
That's so crazy.
And what's his name? Del Toro, the director who made like Pan's Labyrinth and all that. He said like all of his monster stuff comes from having sat in a Catholic church, looking at all the iconography and just being like,
Yeah.
whoa, and like
Yeah.
growing up looking at monsters, and now he makes monster movies because he went through the nightmare door and he was like, whoa, I'm in a nightmare, and now he makes those movies.
That's so
It's like,
crazy. It's so funny. Like so many people will, deconstruct or step away from the religion or whatever their path is, but like everybody's got a different take. Like the fact that like it created so much stress in your life and
mhm.
like the fear stuff, like I had a different take on it than that, but I still like was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
We all like step away from it or, move on maybe potentially and have such a different experience like just for instance again like your husband or my husband is like different experience. It's like
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
But what's so fun is how in Mega it's like so many pop culture references and even just like down to the like like oh god was it is it Allison Bills, was that who you had on recently?
Jen
Jen Bills.
yeah.
I think it was in that podcast we were listening to when we were you got into like the flood and a big like bubble of water being above the earth and like my husband's laughing. I'm like, no, my mom said this. It was like a frozen thing of water and like
Yeah,
well,
I just
yeah
taught that in science class in Christian
yeah it's
school.
like no
It's
these
like,
are all references to like it sounds so silly and like
so
come on.
is Mega helping your husband get a like more detailed glimpse at your upbringing?
Yeah, potentially, yeah get a little glimpse at like
Yeah,
like, this
good.
is so ridiculous. No this is
No,
spot
yeah,
on.
yeah.
I've been like I realized recently that I can't listen to Mega while working out because
Oh,
like
really?
that thing happens where you laugh when you're working out and like especially if like you're benching or something you're under the weight and all of a sudden all the power goes out of my arms because I'm laughing.
Oh, yay!
I was like I can't listen to this while I'm doing anything that's like potentially dangerous while lifting.
It's a road trip podcast.
Yeah,
Oh wait, no,
yeah.
you could drive off the road.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm glad to hear it though. I love hearing that when it's not as damaging to people like Greg and like you and not that it didn't like,
Yeah.
but I really need to remember that that it's a really it's a broad it's a wide river.
But you know what's
And
funny is like, everything you just said about like hell and damnation and principalities of darkness and all that sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, I heard that too. And that was swarming around in my head. But just for some reason, like I focused more on the positive stuff.
yeah.
You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's and maybe I'm downplaying it in this moment, like how that stuff made me feel. But yeah, it's weird because you can hear all that and like, I had a philosophy professor who was like, she was talking about like, like beliefs and like how like you almost don't get to control what you believe in. You don't. And I remember her saying that when she was a kid, she's like, I like kind of believed in God. She's like, but I could not believe in Satan. Like nothing about that sounded right. It's weird sometimes you can't like, control your beliefs. It's just like,
wow,
it either strikes you as like, oh yeah, I buy into that or I don't.
Yeah. And maybe that shows like a firm constitution of how early you are in touch with your own intuition of like, no, that doesn't seem right to me, And I'm sure there's so many variables. Like I am a highly sensitive person. So just being such a sensitive kid, when the grown-ups in my life told me that there are very real invisible demons that are around us all the time, like whose sole purpose is to destroy us and like hand us to Satan so there are more people in hell. I mean, I was just like, whoa. But it's really and then I would associate things with it. Like when you do believe something, you see what you believe, you often we are projecting the way we feel and see the world like into the world in front of us. And like when you're just like, man, it's the most melancholy day where I am just covered in a cloak of like malaise and like I have a storm cloud over my head. You look at the world and you're like, the world is such a sad dark place. And then when you're like, first falling in love or whatever, you're like, the world is so beautiful
Yeah.
and like it gives us everything we need. It sustains us. And I mean, she's right. Like we are only able to think to the limitations of the language that we speak.
Yes.
Like the language we speak is in the language
it holds the boundaries of
controls
your
our
concepts.
ability to think.
Yes,
It's the boundary.
100%.
So, which makes me be like, oh, if I spoke 5 languages, I could think more. I could think better. I could think bigger. And yeah, and then it makes me feel like the language part gets us into a whole other world of like, we are trying to articulate some things that like just might not be, like we were talking earlier, like we shrink reality to that brainstem, like survival stuff. But like, I mean, but then we use language, and maybe this is where religion and everything comes from. All belief systems might come from, like we are trying to create language to describe something that might just be indescribable. It's sort of like, and I feel like ghost stories have been coming up so much lately with my like peer group and in my social interactions. Like everyone is talking about ghosts and these supernatural experiences and seeing things and hearing things and experiencing things. And the more you start talking that way with people, everyone's telling all these stories. And whether you say my mom would say it's an angel or a demon, and I would say it was like my dad would say a demonic stronghold, and I would say, oh, alcoholism, abuse, and violence. Right. Like we're using different language to describe the thing we're looking at.
The thing that's still, there's a realness to it, whatever it is, right? Like depression or whatever it is, and how do you frame it? And then how do you take that idea and place it into like a bigger narrative that paints your whole world?
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
A friend of mine recently told me that and this is not a woo-woo person. He said he sat up in bed and he looked at the bottom of his bed, at the end of his bed. Yeah. There was this man sitting with his like elbows on his knees, like at an angle looking at him. And he was like in old, like colonial garb. And my friend Patrick just said, hello. And the man like smiled at him and then was like instantaneously gone. And like people, I'm hearing these stories more and more and more and more. And we sit and talk about it and we're like, so is that like, time is not an arrow shooting forward, past, present, and future, but it can be this bendy thing? Or is it multiverse? Is it other dimensions where like to that colonial guy, you're the ghost? Like where there's like a thin veil and like things are happening sort of in the same space but in different time, but then it's not. And you see, is that a person? Is that a ghost? Is that your own mind? It's like, it's so trippy. Knows?
Yeah. What we don't know, the like back to what you said in the beginning, like what we don't know about the universe versus like.
No, here's another good one. A friend of mine recently said that she was meditating.
Okay.
And she was like deep. She was like going in pretty deep. She meditates pretty regularly. And I'm sure you know that like the more often you're doing it, the like deeper you can kind of like go.
And I'm a newbie.
You're a newbie. But the less often you do it, the more you're still kind of trying to like drop in, still trying to drop in.
That's me right there.
Still thinking. This is just a busy brain. But she's pretty practiced meditator, and she said she was sitting in her apartment, and she lives in this tiny little but dope ass studio in the West Village, like in New York. And so like there's been so much, I mean, think about like the concentration of families and stories and people in that area. And she said she was deep in this meditation, and all of a sudden, for no reason, she opened her eyes and she was sitting at a table with a family, like eating food. And they all went. And
ooh, you just gave me shivers.
And they all looked at her like at the exact same time. And she closed her eyes and opened them back up. And she was just back in her like West Village apartment. It was like, And I'm like, this is not a crazy person. This is a person that I love and adore and trust. And I'm just like, I don't know, man.
Yes.
I just don't know. I just don't know.
I love those stories where it's like you trust the person and you even trust like when they're telling you the story, you see them like viscerally getting scared or like getting kind of like choked up when they're telling you. You're like, oh, whatever happened, you believe it to be true. Like that's telling, you know, like at least in your experience, like that's what you felt. That much is true.
Yeah. We were traveling recently and Greg took a picture of a ghost and
no,
he's been showing it to a bunch of people and they're like lens flare, this, that. And then other people are like, no, this is not lens flare. And there's two different, he took a series of pictures. We had some friends around a campfire and he was up on the deck of the house looking down at the campfire. And he was like, oh, this is such a pretty picture. He probably took like 4 pictures, never looked at them till the next day. And in the last 2 pictures, there is this blue kind of orb that actually looks like the blue that is around the iconic image of Mary.
Okay.
And it's like far away from the campfire in the 3rd shot, and in the 4th shot it's directly over me.
Oh, and that's good.
And when and it's like, and you can see the like tree behind it, so it's like weirdly in space. And I remember that night, like all of a sudden at the campfire being extremely agitated and being like, I have to go get in bed. And I just went and crawled in bed and was feeling very strange, never thinking anything of it. But then he like zoomed way in on the picture and there is very, very clearly a face. And it's like, and I'm like, no. And he put it on Reddit or some like online shit like that. And all these like ghost specialists were like, lens flare, bullshit. But you can see this face. And this is truly, Jonny, what like haunts me as a like person who I think is alive right now and will someday be dead. I'm like, I don't want to be a ghost. I don't want there to be ghosts like haunting your old life. And you know, this is where I'm like, okay, maybe I do want to be Buddhist, because like Tibetan Buddhists say that like your consciousness is a wild horse and your body is the hitching post, and the wild horse is hitched to this physical body for this lifetime, and that death is like cutting that cord and like go be a wild stuff, you know. I have a
you want to be a little sea biscuit
are much more evolved than me, and who have told me like, Holly, because I get scared of death, and I've had so many friends be like, Holly, what if it's so much better? Like, I don't know. Like, it might be so much better than this. Like, don't lament. We don't know.
Yeah. It's so funny, you know, you were mentioning how like, oh yeah, you've got a bunch of adults in a room telling you all this like same stuff that's scary. It's like, yeah, of course you're gonna believe it. So when growing up, I was terrified of the Greys, the aliens that are like the specific like, you know, like big black eyes. And it was because of church.
Why?
Because our church decided one week it would be fun to do an alien week.
What?
Which sounds so much more crazy than it probably felt to me. I was like, yeah, of course we do an alien week. And they like, I was pretty young, and they like, you know, it was a big mega church too, so they had like the big screens and stuff off to the side. And
hi Meg.
Yeah. And they did like, it was like a video, and they were like telling all these like alien stories, but they were giving it like credence by saying like, oh yeah, you know, all these alien stories, they could just be demons or principalities of darkness, and they're like manifesting as aliens. And they're like, and so what it did is it made one more thing intangibly real that you couldn't defend yourself against, which is like the thing I always say about like, because I'm like afraid of like ghosts or demons or grays. It's all things that you can't defend yourself against.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Like when I was a little kid, I remember I would like when I was like afraid of like robbers, I'd go into the basement and I'd be like, ksh, ksh, I've got a gun, get back. And then like as I got older and I was like, oh no, there's demons down there. It would be like I'd go down there like singing like Christian songs and like being like, in the name of Jesus.
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I used to like whisper it in bed. I would be like, Jesus, 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 because all I knew was that demons hated the name of Jesus. Yeah. And so I figured like if there was one in my room and I was saying the name of Jesus, it'd be like, oh, fuck this place. Cut to me having serious sleep issues because I have to stay awake to say the name of Jesus.
So, on this like, I guess this, this arc of like, being like growing up really Christian, and then even like I guess into part of your adulthood, like doing like working at the church too, right? And then slowly shedding that or whatever that looked like for you, and then now to the point where like you and Greg have Mega. Do you feel still like passionately like as a satire, that like you have a point of view that like with Mega, outside of like the silly references and jokes of like, do you feel like there's a satirical point of view that's like that keeps you on that game and like keeps you like working hard?
For sure. I think Greg is just like comedy is the highest value and specificity in comedy is gold. And so this is just a specific language. And so it's just, it's ripe for comedy. And he's just like comedy, comedy, comedy. And I think I have my little soapbox for sure. Like, and I feel myself go through like, I go through ebbs and flows of really, and I don't know if you listen regularly, if you can tell where I'll just, if I'm getting hot and heated up about something, it'll like, I feel like Hallie went on a real, like LGBT thing for a while with like, does the Bible support it? And stuff. But I can only say it through my son Day's voice, like Day is mostly me, like trying to get my thoughts into like trying to release my own little thought viruses through Hallie's kind of opposition to any of these ideas. But I tend to be like, it's that idea of free people, not to like pat myself on the back or to even say I'm free. Like most days I'm like racked with anxiety, but I am determined and I am committed to putting one foot in front of the other in terms of moving toward more freedom of like, and I do believe the truth will set you free and just living as truthfully as possible and not being ruled by fear and all that stuff. So I think sometimes I'm like, if there's anyone out there who had an experience like me where it was like hurting them, like maybe not only will they feel seen, but they might also feel like commiseration together. And also like, I think that's something that's so special about comedy is that it's very disarming. And when you kind of lay your weapons down, and you're laughing and you can bring some levity to something, like then maybe there can be some healing. And like I hear from people who are like, whoa, I got into it for the comedy and I've like actually experienced healing. And I'm like, I think I have too. Like I didn't want to do Mega. I was like, Greg, I don't want to think about that stuff anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. And it became the little podcast that could, and we're still going. And I'm like, oh yeah, I was probably resisting like, I think what has happened with Mega, what?
Resisting a calling.
I got right. Whoa. It's really interesting. It's because I think what I have had to do through the process of Mega over the last couple of years is I've had to kind of let go of some of my anger at being hurt and my sadness at being hurt and all that. I've had to sort of release it because I really can't, like, I can't comedically do it justice if I, an agenda becomes propaganda, like, and so to bring true levity to it, I've had to actually come to a place of, instead of lamenting it, I'm like genuinely laughing and being like,
finding that joy in the pain and like,
yeah. And I really, and that comes and goes, healing is not linear. I will think I'm like over something and then it rears its little head again and the monster is still in the deep and I'm like, you're still down there. But it's still just kind of like hacking away at it like Beowulf, I guess, of like facing it, and Mega's part of that. And I can feel when I get my little hot under the collar and I'm starting to get an agenda, like, and Greg will just be like, hey, like, what's funny, and I'm like, okay.
That sounds you guys are a nice like foil for each other in that creative process. I think also too that the characters, I mean, even Greg's character you're both pretty positive, makes it so approachable for everybody too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That the characters aren't angry and they're like, the satire is coming from their like their misguided positivity and whatnot.
Utter commitment.
Yeah. So good. I was going to ask you a question. It also just eluded me. Oh.
Hey, has your brain gotten better since COVID?
It has, for the most part. Yeah, except for at this moment. But yeah, it was super. It was like 3 or so weeks of like noticeably cloudy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my best friends had a breakthrough case like a month ago, and she's like, I still can't think. It's weird. I am in a like hello,
Yeah. Did you guys go the year without getting it?
We haven't got it yet.
Yeah.
Now, lately, Greg's been like, well, maybe it's just going to be here so long. Like, everybody's going to get it.
Yeah.
You're going to be, And
maybe it's not as bad if you're vaccinated or not.
I know. Got it. We're getting close to booster time, for crying out loud.
Yeah, we did it wrong. We got the shot. We got the shots like a week after we were out of quarantine from having it. And it just felt like we were sick for like a month and a half. Like that, like when we got those shots, like it knocked us out. Like it was bad. And I think we just should have waited a little longer after we had COVID.
Yeah. Wow. But now I bet you're super safe.
Super safe. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, especially traveling east and everyone's like, oh yeah, Delta's up. And we're like, okay. Matt's like, I think I'm going to wear a mask again. I'm like, okay, I probably should do the same too.
Where are you right now?
We're in Ohio. We're driving to Rochester. Ooh. And we're like in Erie. No, Pennsylvania now. We're in Pennsylvania. Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm in a parking lot outside of a Planet Fitness, a Little Caesars, and a hair salon. Oh. And boy, is it hot in this van, so I've got the car running with the AC on. It's good now, but I was like, I'm gonna have to do this. Like when we traveled in the winter, it was just too cold and things were freezing. Like we were like trying to cook eggs and they were freezing. But now it's like, which is, I'd rather have it be too cold any day of the week.
Yeah. So brother, then I want to tell you, you do not want to go to hell because it's hot Lord. Down there. All right.
I do not do well in heat. So, hey, I want to be respectful of your time, and I really appreciate you doing this.
I have loved talking to you. I think that you have a really, really delightful energy. I like
you too. It's so good. Like, you get your like improv champions when you're like in a small little world of like Chicago, and you're like, I saw a bunch of your shows and like Greg's shows, and it's so cool to like get and chat with you.
Yeah,
there's something extra special about when it's like you were following someone's work that only 100 people could watch a week versus like something that like everybody had access to.
Yeah.
It makes it kind of special.
I feel like we came up in a pretty golden age of a very specific kind of comedy.
I think so.
I get such nostalgia. I really feel grateful for the like weirdo community that I came up with in Chicago. And we just took Mega to Chicago a couple weeks ago and did a live Mega show at Lincoln Hall. And it was, I had friends from the Mega church I used to work at, Willow Creek. I had friends come from there who I worked with there. We had like a full band, like doing parody, like worship music. And we had like worship, like ribbon dancers.
Yes.
It was a really fun live show.
Oh, I wish I would have seen that.
It was really fun. And we had, I don't know if you know Abby McEnany.
Yes.
She's from Second City. And
she's great.
Also, now she has a Showtime show called Work in Progress, where she plays over 50, what does she call herself? An over 50 fat queer dyke, protagonist.
Yeah.
And she's so incredible.
Did she come on in character, in that character?
She came on Mega. She did the live show, and she came on as a character who had gone through gay conversion therapy, and it was very successful. And so now she was very, very straight, and it was just set up to be. So it was so fun because she's just like the gayest person in the entire world, and she's like, so lovely. I just all I want is men, and but it was funny because like when we did a little interview with her before we started recording the podcasting character, and me and Greg were ourselves and Abby was herself, and we sat and decided like what her character would be, and which is exactly how we do at the beginning of each podcast. Before we start recording, we sit with our guests and we're like, hey, have you had any weird jobs? Do you have any hobbies or passions that can inform your character? And then whatever they're like, well, like I've been like taking pilot classes or whatever. We're like, oh, cool. Then I'm going to be a character who flies a small plane to drop off missionaries. Okay, let's go. And we start recording. So when we were doing the little interview beforehand as ourselves with Abby, I was like, I just want to apologize ahead of time for my character's point of view about LGBTQIA plus stuff. Like, I apologize in advance. Because sometimes, honestly, it does, like my character Hallie's point of view, like sometimes it really does take a toll on me. Like saying that stuff out loud, sometimes really? I just start to feel like, I don't know how long I can do this. Like it sort of hurts my soul. And I try to balance it with my son Day character that I'm always referencing that is more my point of view, but I had to apologize in advance, and she was like, it's fine. But it's hard to say some of those things sometimes. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
And it's also, I recently went home for the first time since the pandemic because I hadn't seen my family. And I was like, really like, I had all this heaviness about going home and like all the things that were going to come up and and my dad is a megachurch pastor and he kind of had a conversation with me where he sort of was putting a full court press on me about like, it's really important to me how that we believe the same stuff. And I was like, I understand that, but, and I mostly just don't say much because I just feel like there's not much to say. And, but it was funny. The whole time I was home, I had been so angsty about how it was going to be really hard. And then the whole time I was there, I was like, oh, this is so great. This is sweet. This is normal. This is fine. It's totally fine. Like when I was finally there, I was like, oh, it's fine. Then as soon as I came back to LA, I was like, oh, and then this.
You started analyzing it.
This was like so fucked up. And I'm like, oh, wait, you click into what you have normalized so fast. And it's only distance that gives you the like, wait a second. And I find that to be tricky as hell.
That's so tricky. Navigating, the family dynamics of, my brother's gay and I'm gay. And they're, the rest of my family is very evangelical, like, don't be gay. And, like works at the church and blah, blah, blah. And it's tricky. Like going before you see family, you have all these emotions that come up where you're like, argh. And then when you're there, I totally agree where it's like, well, my family's very like, just non-confrontational.
Yeah.
And so, nothing ever gets said to your face. It's an email or a text if it ever comes up.
Right.
And it's always fine. But then when you walk away too, you're like, oh, but I just literally like clicked back in to that old version of me.
Right.
With those old feelings.
Seamlessly like, and undetectable to you.
Yep. And you know what's so funny is like Matt didn't really grow up in that. Like he got accepted by his family pretty quick and coming out relatively young compared to me, like in high school. And he kind of clicks into that energy too that my family's doing. Like, oh yeah, don't talk this way, don't bring this up. This feels it's just like it's a hard thing to navigate. It feels like it's that thing kind of where do you put the flashlight? Where do you shine it? Like it is okay. It's really okay. And then sometimes I make it bad. But no, there's actually real reasons that it does feel weird or like that thing said or that thing never like taken care of or like
And then it's also like, is it worth it to like take your stand and be like, listen, like I keep hearing this. Timothy Leary, I think, said, like, lift your feet and float downstream. Lift your
Yeah.
feet and float downstream. And every time I try to plant my feet and be like, I get hurt. And it's like, lift your feet and float downstream.
like
and
that.
like, and then it's like, well, then maybe I didn't educate my parents or whatever, but also maybe that's not my job. And like with your parents, are they love the sinner, hate the sin still, or no?
Yes, absolutely. Which is never works, right, in practice.
Right.
But they, my family's very lovely. They're wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's, but they're beholden to the beliefs that they that come along with the whole group of beliefs. And so it's they could never take out a piece of the puzzle and like move forward. And also there's no real reason for that. There's been no catalyst, of like people thinking differently in their life or diversities for them to really encounter that. So actually, me and my brother in a way are like the first amount of like, something that challenges their beliefs. Because I mean, for myself, like being gay from an early age was a major catalyst to me examining my beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also funny too. It's like there's that thing too with family where it's like, you know what, like you get this like kind of like Christian thing again. We're just like, you just gotta love them. You just gotta take care of them, love on them. And it's like that's true for your family too. Like wherever they're at with their beliefs is just like you just have to love them and like just be authentic. Try to be authentic as you can. It's hard to even be authentic around family that you feel like might be judging you for who you are, but just try to be authentic and love them.
And when we're all kind of just not talking about anything in an effort to just keep the peace, it's like, how authentic is that? And it's like, well, then maybe the higher value in these instances is peace. And just, I love these people. It's funny, like, would we like each other? I don't know. But we love each other. And man, it's one of the things that also has come out of Mega as a podcast is that it has introduced me to what I had no idea was even in existence, which is a pretty strong ex-evangelical community, like, and a lot of like different people on social media, like really trying to reach out in healing and like religious trauma and everything.
Yeah.
And I think the first time I ever heard, like, I met a religious trauma therapist. I was like, come again? Wait, we're acknowledging that this is a thing, that this is oh, whoa, wow. Oh yeah. Wait, I have that. Oh wow, it is real. I'm
That's so nice to have that with other people.
Yeah,
it's just like because also I think too, like maybe as you're stepping away from like religion too, there's maybe a phase or maybe a constant phase. I think even maybe sometimes for me where it's like I don't want to be hurtful or destructive, or I also like I'm willing to admit I don't know what I don't know. And I don't want to like say the wrong thing or be like stake my ground like completely on the opposite side of the fence and like and so you're so careful about like being like, oh, wasn't that weird? Wasn't that hurtful? And then so when you start to hear that from other people, you're like, okay, okay, these were the good things, these are like the positive things, but like, oh yeah, I didn't really talk about like the weird or the bad stuff as much.
Yeah. And you know what? If we did choose to put ourselves into a mind control like belief system to see if we could find our way out, we really gotta high five each other and be like, we made it. And we're not perfect and we're not like, I am totally free, but man, we're on our way, right?
Yeah. It's I think it's better to, like step into uncertainty any day of the week than to be know you're lying to yourself, right? Baby, that's not good.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah, when you know you're lying to yourself, it eats you. It eats you from the inside out.
Yeah. And the uncertainty just eats you from another direction, but
all directions.
Holly, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and doing this.
Jonny, it's a true pleasure. And man, enjoy your way up to Rochester.
Thank you.
Stay cool.
Awesome.
Stay
you too.
cool,
I'm gonna send you a clip from an episode where I was a guest of mine was talking about a crazy ghost story.
Okay, I love it.
Because I've been like, I love ghost stories too, but they terrify me, and I'm like, whenever someone tells me, I'm like, okay, just tell me quick. But I'll send you one.
Okay, good.
Thanks for doing this, Holly.
Thank you. Mwah.
Mwah, toodaloo.
Take care.
Likewise.
Dance appetite, dance in the middle of the night. Come on, dance appetite, dance in the middle of the night. Come on, dance, wake up the appetite. Dance